to the daily allegory through astrological divination. Our magic motto of the day is they built Axis to watch the world, then the ledger watched them back. In this story, a man learns that his ex keeps a web of former lovers close, not out of romance, but to grease the gears of a shadowy network where a few connected insiders can pull favors, make charges evaporate, and bury scandals, while street-level criminals do the dirty work. At the center of her team of worms, we'll call them, a clique of military-affiliated men who abuse their access to siphon off military-grade surveillance tools and equipment, using them to stalk and intimidate targets. Seed buildings with concealed cameras linked through an Axis-style monitoring system and turn modern wired apartments into traps disguised as amenities. When the operation merges with a newly built development in a small Pennsylvania town, the scheme expands. The ex ingratiates herself with the property manager and on-site staff, and together they exploit tenants' privacy for profit, laundering the evidence through encrypted channels and selling it in the darkest corners of the internet. As whispers of staged break-ins, tampered food, intimidation, and suspicious self-inflicted explanations pile up, the network tries to erase one resident completely, threatening his family, forcing him out, and making him vanish until he reappears with proof, methodically dismantling the entire machine and one compromised accomplice at a time, determined to make sure no one else endures their psychological torture ever again. Today's story is called Axis of Worms. The first thing he remembered, later, was how sweetly she could speak inside a room that was supposed to be safe. It was always the same cadence, soft words with a velvet edge, apologies dressed as affection, intimacy used as a key. Mercury conjunct Venus in the fourth, language and charm fused at the hearth, persuasion served warm, lies plated like comfort food. If a home is where truth should live, she treated home like a stage where truth could be replaced without anyone noticing the props had changed. When he left her, he thought he was leaving a relationship. He didn't understand he was stepping out of a machine. She stayed sexually entangled with her exes the way other people stayed networked. It wasn't romance, it was logistics. Each old lover was a rung in a ladder. One a lawman who could make paperwork drift into the void. One a criminal who could make problems go away permanently. One a fixer who knew which doors opened when you knocked with the right name. Around her, favors moved like currency, and sex was the receipt that nobody documented. She called her circle friends. He eventually heard what they called themselves when they thought nobody was listening. The worms. They moved underground. They didn't build. They burrowed. They ate through foundations. The worms included a handful of military men who wore honor in daylight and theft in the dark. They abused access, stole software and techniques never intended for civilian use or on civilians, and treated surveillance like sport. Their crown jewel was a system that they called Axis, a private mesh of cameras and remote feeds stitched together with stolen tooling and gray market hardware. Mirrorless-lens units were small enough to hide inside vents, smoke detectors, light fixtures. Axis didn't just watch, though. It cataloged, tagging moments like data points: who entered, who slept, who cried, who broke, weaponized temperature changes and body dynamics like peripherals. The woman didn't need to understand the technology. She understood hunger. She pointed, and the worms fed. That's how Bloomsburg entered the story. A new development rose there, clean lines, new paint, a kind of place marketed as smart living. The units came pre-wired with Cat 6-like veins in the walls, sold as a perk. Fast Wi-Fi, seamless connectivity, residents signing leases thinking that they were buying a convenience. A luxury convenience. They were buying exposure, though. The woman slept with the property manager within a month of her current boyfriend moving in. It was the same pattern. Every time Mercury and Pisces, words like water, promises that flowed around consent instead of through it. In public, the property manager was charming, engaged, helpful. The kind of man who remembered names and smiled as if he meant it. But in private, he had quite the history. Hidden recordings, coercion, predation, especially towards the younger female college-aged tenants that he would slip with, unbeknownst to his fiancée, soon-to-be wife. The one who didn't yet know how to detect the weight of a stare. He told her the building was wired like a gift. She gave him access, and the building became a farm. In the beginning, the man, the resident that they all targeted, noticed only the small wrongnesses. The way maintenance arrived a little too often, the way the smoke detector in the living room didn't sit perfectly flush, the way the Wi-Fi name changed twice without notice. He chalked it up to paranoia, stress even, coincidence. That was the society's true genius. They didn't need you to believe in conspiracy. They just needed you to doubt yourself. And the group around her, the law and the lawless, kept the environment fogged. Neighbors were nudged into suspicion. He's unstable. You gotta watch him. Coworkers got anonymous hints. He's narcissistic. He beats me and he hurts the kids. The therapist they recommended spoke too softly and wrote way too carefully, as if every sentence was being read by somebody else. Sun, North Node, Venus, Mercury, and Pisces, a stellium of mist. Everything looked kind. Everything sounded reasonable. Every attack wore a smile, face of concern. Then the Aries engine kicked in beneath the dream. Saturn, Neptune, Chiron, and Aries. Discipline fused with delusion. Wounds pressed into action. Consequences learning how to sprint. The worms escalated. Because escalation is what predators do when subtlety stops working. Break-ins that left nothing obvious missing, but rearranged just enough to say, we were here. Food that tasted wrong, a door that didn't latch quite the way it used to. A phone call with no voice, just breath, and then a click. And then the thrust that changed a man's bones. Arlo. They went after his children. Not directly, not in a way that could be reported cleanly anyways. They were clever and creative in the way that they did this. They used implication, shadows, proximity, enough to convince him that if he didn't cooperate, his oldest daughter would pay for it. The woman delivered the warning the way she delivered everything, softly, almost tender, as if she hated having to do it. That was the night he stopped thinking like a victim. The next weeks blurred into a corridor of terror and calculation. The worms let outsiders into his apartment. They assaulted him relentlessly. They violated boundaries until the word privacy felt like an absolute joke. They tampered, bullied, pushed him toward breaking points. They wanted him frantic. They wanted him discredited. They wanted a narrative ready for the day something self-inflicted happened. Somewhere in those weeks, a clandestine federal team got close enough to smell the rot. They didn't arrive with sirens, though. They arrived with silence. In courtrooms and agencies, investigations live or die on one thing. Proof you can't argue away. Somebody's existence might be proof enough or witness to something that is coming up. The problem with psychological warfare is that it's designed to look like nothing, like just mere inconveniences sometimes. Designed to turn witnesses into liars and victims into unreliable narrators. So the team built the case like engineers. They used classified surveillance architecture the public would later call quantum because no one else had a better word for it. I mean, how can you explain some things that are non-civilian necessary or purposed? Not even in a case study. It wasn't science fiction teleportation. It was chain of custody made unbreakable. Time stamping and integrity verification so rigorous that once a file existed inside their system, it could not be altered without leaving a scar. A very deep one at that. Every signal they captured, network anomalies, device fingerprints, handshakes, remote access attempts, hidden camera telemetry, was sealed in a way that made denial very expensive. They didn't just watch the worms. They watched the people above the worms. The investigation mapped relationships like constellations. Who called whom after a break-in? Who met whom at charity events, who paid whom through shell routes, who used official influence to smooth the edges. The team understood quickly that the woman wasn't just a participant. She was an interface. I would assume groomed interface. The Pisces glamour that made brutality feel handled. After the property manager smiling in daylight, and the property manager smiling in daylight was a keystone. When the team moved closer, the building's internet disappeared. One morning, residents woke up to an email, service interruption due to upgrades. That's what they called it, upgrades. The Wi-Fi went dark. The building stopped offering internet as an amenity altogether, suddenly, just abruptly, out of nowhere, as if connectivity had become too dangerous. It wasn't an upgrade. It was a panic response, and that's how it'll be viewed in court, I'm assuming. Axis didn't like eyes on it. The worms thought cutting the internet would blind the world and starve the investigation. They didn't understand the team wasn't relying on the building's kindness, though. The team had already collected enough to prove intent, coordination, and unauthorized surveillance patterns. The internet shutdown only did one thing. It confirmed the fear behind the mask. Inside the building, the man made his decision. He vanished. Not on accident, not as a victim, strategically. He let the worms believe that they succeeded. He let them tell their story. He's gone. He's broke. He fled. He's unstable. He's homeless. He's a drug addict. He ditched his kids. He just lies too much. He's off the map. They needed him erased to keep the machine safe. So he gave them an erasure. He withdrew from every trace that they monitored. He stopped responding. He stopped appearing. He became a rumor, a whisper amongst the group. Then in the quiet space of disappearance, he did what they never expected. Documented everything. The man wasn't an investigator by title, but he had a mind that didn't accept confusion as reality. He tracked patterns the way some people track weather. He gathered proof they wouldn't rely on anyone believing him. He collected receipts. Recipes, almost. Photographs of tampered fixtures, screenshots of account access anomalies, recordings of threats delivered in soft voices, psychic visions, perhaps, notes and dates and faces, fragments of the network's own arrogance, but most importantly, the group logistics, system triggers, patterns, group patterns, processes, pattern recognition-based items. He wasn't alone either, not anymore. The clandestine team had been watching him too, not as prey, but as a potential turning point. They didn't need him to be a hero. They needed him to stay alive long enough to become a witness. And when he resurfaced, he didn't come back a man begging to be believed. He came back like a blade. The first member fell quietly, a maintenance worker who bragged too freely at the bar, unaware that the team had already marked him as a node. The next was a lawman who tried to make something disappear and instead disappeared himself. Into subpoenas, interviews, warrants. Another worm panicked and tried to leave town, and the attempt to run made him easier to catch. The woman felt it first in her social web. A call that didn't get returned, a door that no longer opened, a friend who suddenly became busy forever. Her exes, the ones she used as leverage, began distancing themselves like animals sensing fire. Venus and Pisces can make a person believe they're untouchable because they're adored. But adoration doesn't protect you from evidence. The property manager tried to regain control by tightening the building's physical access. He changed locks. He revised policies. He played the offended professional. How dare you accuse us of this? Bruh. He smiled for residents and threatened them in private. He leaned on old tricks. Fear, shame, confusion. The team didn't argue with him. They waited. And the waiting was the cruelest thing that they could do, because it let the worms keep moving, keep coordinating, keep speaking, keep leaving footprints, digital and physical. While the case hardened around them, eventually the man watched from a distance as the building that once bragged about seamless connectivity sat like a blacked out hive. No internet, no smart living, just residents buying their own routers, asking each other why the amenity vanished overnight. Suspicion seeded itself. People started looking up at smoke detectors. People started noticing vents. The mask began to slip without anybody pulling on them. And in the end, the dismantling wasn't a single dramatic raid with headlines and helicopters. Although, I'm sure that's coming. It was a sequence of doors closing one by one until the network realized it had nowhere left to run. The worms had always relied on two things: secrecy and disbelief. Access depended on people thinking that they were alone in their fear. And they weren't. The last time the man saw his ex at a distance outside the courthouse, she looked smaller than the myth she'd built around herself. Her face was composed, but her eyes were searching the crowd the way a drowning person searches for shore. He didn't approach her. He didn't even need revenge. He needed finality. Because the point wasn't only to punish. It was to stop the machine from ever feeding again. And when the federal team finally moved in with the kind of paperwork that does not negotiate, no matter who or what you are and what you have, sealed files, stacked charges, evidence that held, Bloomsburg's neat new development became what it had always been beneath the paint. A crime scene disguised as a home. The man walked away from it with his children intact, the proof no longer hidden, and a sick system called Access reduced to a string of exhibits. Behind him, the worms learned the oldest lesson in the world. You can bury a human being, but you can't bury a ledger forever. And for that, we're grateful. Make good choices out there.